Hi, I'm Sevilla with Impossible Life Stories, where we bring you stories of real life miracles and God encounters that will bring you hope and encouragement, no matter what circumstances you're facing. If you can have a tiny seed of hope, that can grow into faith. And we all know that faith moves mountains. So your breakthrough is possible, your miracle is coming, and your God encounter is right here. Welcome to Impossible Life Stories. Today I'm bringing you a story that should give a lot of you guys a lot of hope for if you're stuck in addiction, or if you're the mom of people, of your children that you're praying for that are stuck in addiction. We have Jared Flack with us, and he has quite an incredible story that we want to share with you today. Hi, Jared. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, where did you start? How did you get into drugs, and then, how did you get out of it? And you had alcoholism too, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
yep. Yeah, so I probably developed an aversion to pain early on in life, which I think was kind of an open door. My parents were divorced for most of my childhood, and I think there was some trauma with that, which I didn't really understand when I was older because it made sense then. But I think a lot of the emotional stuff that occurs in children's hearts and minds, you can't just think it through as an adult. Like you have to deal with that stuff. And so there was a lot of pain and anger inside me. And growing up, I don't even really always know where it came from. I just know it was there. So junior high would have been between seventh and eighth grade year. My mom divorced my stepdad. And so at that point, there's no male role model in my life at all. And so I think that kind of lit the powder keg that I've been building over the years. So I started smoking cigarettes, started stealing alcohol from my mom. Uh, Never got drunk because it was gross and could never drink enough to get drunk, but was definitely in full blown rebellion. Uh, got into shoplifting, just kind of doing whatever I wanted. And at that point, like I was probably addicted to pleasure more than anything. So I didn't want to feel pain. I wanted to feel good. So whatever made me feel good, that's what I wanted to do, whether it was, you know, something sexual, something with substances, whatever. So after eighth grade, my mom moved me and my brother out to California. She still lives out there now. And out there, was even further away from my dad's influence. And up to that point, I think he tried to be in our lives, but living 2 hours away, seeing him on weekends, there's only kind of so much he can do, especially when I'm now a teenager and basically shutting most authority out of my life. you know, and so moving out to California, was still smoking, got into smoking weed. That was pretty common out there. Uh, so this would have been 97, just for a frame of reference for people. And I didn't start drinking till after I was an adult because oddly enough, it's a lot easier to get illicit drugs in high school than it is alcohol. Like, to get alcohol, you had to find somebody, you either had to go steal it or you had to find somebody that would buy it for you. Uh, you know, so it was a lot easier to get drugs at school. So started smoking weed, then got into hallucinogenics, uh, then moved on to cocaine. And again, it was pretty much whatever. My main drug of choice was weed. So as long as I had that, and if I had money, then I was down to party with whatever. But if I didn't have any weed, then that was like my main focus. So a lot of the other drugs were always like a side dish, if you will, to marijuana. But I remember senior year of high school, I had this idea that I'm going to be a man soon, so I should learn how to drink beer because men drink beer. And so I started drinking, and I'm a binger, and so I would start and I wouldn't stop until like everything was gone or I would like pass out. So with other drugs, that's not so bad, but with alcohol, it usually means I was getting sick all the time. because I would just drink too much and then get sick, and then it wasn't as much fun. Uh,
Yeah, the blacking out thing is never that much fun.
well, I hadn't blacked out to that point. I would get sick.
Oh, okay.
So I would get sick, and then at that point the party's over for me because now I don't feel good.
Mm-hmm.
Even still though, it was just another side thing. After graduating high school, there was a lot of behavioral issues and things with my mom that I did a lot of damage in our relationship. And so basically, when I graduated, she moved and told me that I wasn't moving with her, which so she basically was kicking me out. But
And you
and
were how old then?
it was
17?
18, 18.
18. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. I graduated high school and like a week later turned 18. So it
Okay.
was, and I was fine with that. I've always been pretty independent, so the idea of being on my own didn't bother me or scare me. Um, and I think it's one of those things where I don't know that I would have moved out on my own because that would require money and effort and work. And if I could just live with her, then obviously I have money to spend on other things. So, but I got an apartment, moved out, and then ran into some people. I started doing meth all the time. And so at that point, I actually quit smoking weed because I was just doing meth all the time. And so was on methamphetamines for probably the better part of 4 or 5 months, like heavy, staying out 4 or 5 days in a row, and then only sleeping because I would just my body would just shut down. You know, Ended up losing my job over that. I had a pretty decent job as an assistant shift manager at a cultural arts center, and it was actually like looking back, like God had set me up for potentially for success. Like I could have started this job fresh out of high school and been worked myself into a fairly comfortable situation, you know. But I screwed that up.
Oh,
So
that sucks.
yeah, I mean it is what it is. And then one of the guys we partied with was gang affiliated, and so there was an altercation, and his cousin got stabbed in our parking lot. With some guys that were visiting downstairs neighbors that we didn't like anyways. It was just a bad situation. And the complex manager, she said, because in California, like if you in Ohio, if you get evicted, nobody checks your rental record because it's just not really a thing. But in California, they do. So like if you get evicted, like that's a black mark on your record, the same way as like getting fired from a job. Like it makes it very difficult to find other places. So she was like, you're 18, you know, you were hanging around the wrong people, but like I gotta either you need to move out or I will evict you, but I'm gonna give you the chance to at least move out. The people downstairs below, she had other issues with them, and so she just evicted them. Like they didn't get a second chance. And so my roommate, he'd been living there before, um, and he's like, well, let me try and talk to her. And he basically said, if Jared goes, I go. And she says, okay, see you guys. So
Bye.
yeah. So at that point, like I didn't have a job, didn't have a place to live, so I ended up living in my car for about 3 or 4 months in the wintertime in California. So this is Northern California. So you're talking probably 40s, 50s during the day, but raining, and then 20s, 30s at night. So it's cold, not as cold as Ohio, but it was cold. So I lived in my car for 3 or 4 months and didn't really have a job. I had some odd jobs here and there. Um,
Did you have
uh,
friends did you do any couch surfing or was it just
yeah,
out of your
so
car?
I had a buddy that I slept on his bedroom floor for about 2 weeks, and his parents said, okay, that no more of that. So like I would park my car sometimes in front of their house. Um, and so like I had people that like would help me out. I'd have places to go. Like, if I came over, my mom would feed me, she would give me money. As long as I was looking for a job, she would help me out.
And were
So
you actually looking for a job?
no, so like the first day I was living in my car, she took me out to eat at Wendy's, and she's like, they're hiring. You need a job, you should apply. And I'm like, I don't want to work at Wendy's, but whatever, like I knew that if I said I didn't have a good reason to say no, I didn't have any other job and I needed money. So I applied, I got hired. I worked one night at Wendy's and I was the only white guy and they stuck me in the cash register and it felt really awkward because you've got black guys and Hispanic guys in the back cooking and doing all this stuff and this new guy they stick on the cash register and it felt really awkward and I was just like I can't do this. Like they didn't give me any problems, but it felt awkward to me that like I'm a white guy and I got hired and shoved up here instead of like in the back learning how to run the kitchen like them. And in hindsight, it probably was not actually that weird because it's easier to run a cash register than it is to do food service. So knowing that now, like if somebody can run a cash register, it's actually easier than food prep. So, yeah, so I did that. I got a job as a security guard, watching parking lots in my car. So it was great. Like I could drive over there, spend a few hours in my car, which I was living in anyways, and get paid. But I left that job to go to a party one time, and so that ended.
It's just massive irresponsibility.
Yeah, I did whatever I wanted, whatever felt good, and because I was 18, I knew all there was to know, and you weren't going to tell me, otherwise. And again, like I just like, if it was hard or painful, I didn't want to do it. Didn't want anything to do with it. I would put up with some stuff to get money or to get by because I knew like the pleasure on the other end of that. But, like one night I wanted to go to the party. I didn't want to work. So I took my uniform off and left it and didn't, I remember the security place, they called me, they were upset. You didn't even like call us and tell us you were quitting. We thought somebody abducted you. And I'm like, really? Like seriously? So
Oh
yeah.
man, can you imagine though? They're hiring you for security. You that is doing all this other
Well,
stuff.
they
That's
didn't
really
know,
funny.
like, so I didn't have to pass a drug test, and I passed a background check because I didn't have a criminal record at that point in my life. So, and that was the one thing, like, so I grew up in church, and so even when I was not walking with the Lord, like, I knew how to talk to people. I knew I interviewed really well. I had a good work ethic if I wanted to employ it. You know, uh, I could get by in professional or classroom settings, stuff like that. So it's always intelligent. I knew who to talk to, what to say, to get what I wanted, and to get by. So I did. Uh, but during while I was in my car, though, I did quit doing meth. Started smoking weed again. Started drinking more. That kind of stuff. And my mom, I think, it kind of started to see the futility of the situation. She said, maybe you should call your dad and see if you can move back in with him and kind of get a fresh start. And I knew that moving in with him would mean that I would have to quit partying. I'd have to be sober. And in AA, they call these moments of clarity where, like, in the midst of your dysfunction and disorder, like, truth finds a seed bed. So I remember sitting in this park, thinking about, like, should I do this or not? And it was probably the only time I ever heard like an audible voice from God. It was, I don't know that it was audible, but it was really loud in my head, that it seemed to come from outside my head. And it was just the word go. And so I was like, okay. And so, like, before in high school, I basically renounced my faith, and said that I didn't believe there was a God. And I don't know if I really believed that or if I was just running from what I knew in my subconscious to be true or not. But I remember after one night working at that event center, it was actually or I'd been up all night doing acid, and it was the next morning, and so I was mostly sober, enough that I know that the encounter I had was not like the drugs. And to that point, though, some people do have encounters while on drugs, and they're still real. It's not. It's the drugs may be a vehicle, but when they encounter heavenly beings, it's still very real. They just may not realize it. And I think some people laugh it off as not real. But I basically had like a showdown with God. Like, if you're really real, prove it. And I basically threw out a challenge to him, and he didn't meet it. And so I was like, haha, you're not real. And then I don't know what it was other than potentially just the fear of the Lord, or just the presence of God, like, filled this room, and it was very big and intense and scared me. So I ran away. But I was like,
where did you run to? Like, is that when
well,
you
I
moved
was,
to your dad's, or?
no. Like, I was at work, and so I ran out of the room. And so, like, at that point, from that point on, it basically was, okay, God's real. It didn't change the way I was living, but I was like, okay, God's real. Like, he proved himself to me. Like, he's really there. He's really real. Um, yeah. So I moved back to Ohio, stayed sober for a little bit, got bored. You meet people, water seeks its own level. So started partying again, and then started drinking more, especially after I turned 21, because drugs were a lot harder to find in Ohio than alcohol. And once I turned 21, I could go down to the store and buy it. I didn't have to like hunt and find somebody, and it was definitely a lot cheaper. So I started drinking more, and so alcohol became the main driver in my life at that point. um and I would get drunk, and somebody else would have other substances. So at that point, hey, let's go. Let's, whatever it was. I didn't usually ask too many questions other than, is this going to cost me anything, or is this free?
Yeah, I mean, priorities.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, because I remember, like, even just to show you like how big of a driver it was. Like, I remember going to strip bars, and like, you'd want girls to dance for you, but I'm only giving them like $1 or two, which they don't like. My buddy was like, you're not gonna get anybody to dance if you only give them $2. I'm like, yeah, but if I give them more, how am I supposed to buy drinks? And he was just like,
Did they
he's
get to
like,
know you there pretty good, and they'll be like, we
well,
don't really
like
like you?
yeah, well, it was just actually really just one night, and he was like, seriously? It's like, why are you drinking? I'm like, because I want to see naked girls, but I need to drink, like, so. And so even if they don't dance for me, because I mean, they're not going to do anything anyways unless you have lots of money. I could sit here and watch them dance for other people and still drink. So that's what I did. It was kind of a waste of time, I think, given the establishment and what the purpose of it was. But yeah, my goal was to just drink, was to be drunk. So I had been talking with a friend, an old friend, like every night for a week, and she was telling me, I would call her drunk, and really wasn't happy with life, was getting in trouble at work. My drinking was having effects on my life. And so one night, and I had taken some, I don't even know why, but somebody gave me antipsychotic medication, and I took it. I don't know why, but I did. And and it was a very weird mental experience. But I remember calling my dad, and was like, I need help, But by the time he got there, my mind had changed, and I didn't want to leave until I had consumed everything in the house, because I knew, like, if I go with him, this is it. It's done. So I moved back in with him again. You know, did outpatient treatment for about 6 months, and was doing well. I'd even like went to community college for a semester, met some people, went out, started drinking again, like, and that was it. So
Now,
it
were
was
you
about,
hiding your drinking from your dad at that point, or
um
were you an adult and you didn't have to hide it?
so like at that point, like, you if I had a beer or two around my dad, like, he didn't have a problem with that. Like, I worked third shift. So one time I came home with a beer from work, and he was like, "You're drinking at 7 o'clock in the morning." And I'm like, I just got off work. What's the difference between me doing this at 7 a.m. and you doing this at 5 p.m.?
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, okay. I mean, it was sound logic, Um, so I didn't really have like the drunken partying and stuff like that. Yeah, I did lie and hide, but the fact that I was drinking and like I would work all week and I would go out on the weeknights, but would come home. But on the weekends, like he wouldn't see me from Friday till sometimes Monday morning at work because we worked together. So like he knew, he had an idea. I mean, it didn't take a whole lot to put two and two together. I think he was just relieved that he wasn't getting phone calls in the middle of the night, you know. But during this like year and a half, 2 year process, like I had a couple accidents, um, and it just kind of got into a place in life where it wasn't working anymore. And I remember when I did outpatient treatment, they talked about the powerlessness of alcohol, where you lose the ability to choose. And at that point in my life, I thought I was still in control. And it was like, I'm drinking because I want to. I'm drinking because it's fun. It's not, I'm still in control. At that point in my life, I realized that I was no longer in control because I would be like, I don't want to drink today, or I don't want to drink anymore, but I would still end up drunk, like against my own will, Um, yeah. So that's the weird thing with addiction is like you want to stop, but you can't, and you find out how little control sometimes you really have. Because realistically, what you're doing is you have to say no to pleasure and say yes to pain, because you have to change, which is painful. And most people caught in addiction, the pain of changing is greater than their ability to deal with the pain they're presently living in usually. Even
Yeah. How do
I
you
mean,
ever switch that?
I don't know. A lot of it, I think, is divine intervention. There has to be a God component. Well, it depends. Like, somebody who started down that road and they're short ways in, something traumatic happens and it can scare people out. Um, but once you're deep in, like I was, like years lifestyle, like just things built around addiction and dysfunction, like you don't just unplug from that, you know, not without divine help. So, but I got to a place where like life was just not fun anymore, and I was like done. And I knew at that point like I couldn't fix myself, but I just had this internal belief that like God was the only one who could fix me. I didn't know how that was going to work, but I just knew like I can't do this. Like God has to do it. I remember meeting with a pastor, um, and he gave me some really good advice after rededicating my life to Jesus on October weekend, like in 2006. And he said, don't try and change yourself. Let God change you. And at the time, what I heard was keep drinking,
I
which is
love
which is
it.
not what he meant. But in because sometimes we try and fix ourselves and we just end up getting in the way, and we prolong things because God a lot of times is not going to run us over to fix our problems. We have to get out of the way and allow Him to do what He can do. So I kept drinking, kept partying, and it was within a couple of weeks I got a DUI, and that was probably like the beginning of the end there for me. Um, and
Yeah,
I
DUIs
remember,
are pretty painful. I mean, if you're gonna
well,
go
so
through it.
like so at this point, like I knew like my truck was impounded. There'd been an accident. Luckily, I didn't hurt anybody or myself. But I knew there was no way I was gonna be able to lie about this or hide this. Like everything was coming to the surface, and there was no evading it anymore. So I remember like the highway patrol post, the guy was like, he's like, I don't want to take you to jail for DUI. You seem like you're like, I think I was remorseful, you know what I mean? And he had compassion on me, and he was like, he's like, I don't want to take you to jail. So if you can't find somebody to come get you, I'll take you home. And I told him, I said, you're not taking me home. I said, I said, I said, if somebody doesn't come get me, you're taking me to jail. Like, I was like, you're not taking me, because I didn't want to face my dad, you
You'd
know.
rather face jail than your dad?
Yeah. Yeah. At the time, because I'm still like half drunk, I'm still processing all this. Like I'm not ready to have that conversation with him. I knew it was coming, but I was like, not now, you know. And so I was thinking to myself, like, if if because my friend wouldn't answer his cell phone if he didn't recognize the number. So I'm trying to call him from the highway patrol post. He doesn't recognize the number, so he's not picking up. And so even though they're not supposed to, they let me use my own personal cell phone to call my friend, who then picked up and came and got me. But I had purposed in my mind that, like, if my friend doesn't come get me, if I have to, I'm gonna punch a cop. Like, 'cause I'm not going home. Like, I just was that, you know, yeah, it was.
Wow. How do you even get in that headspace? Like that's
I just, because I wasn't ready, and so I went home with my friend to his house, and like, I remember laying down in his bed and just sobbing and then passing out. And I knew, like, so I called my dad later that morning and said, hey, because obviously I didn't go to work, you know. And so I called him. I said, I'm going to be home at lunch. I think you should come home for lunch because we need to talk. But by then I was pretty much sober, so, like, I had time to process it. So I knew I wasn't going to get out of this, but at 5 o'clock in the morning in the highway patrol post, I was not ready to deal with that. Um, so I met with him, had the conversation, and so he was basically like, I'll help you, but you got to pay the price of your choices. Like, he says, whatever fines you have to pay, he said, those are on you. And so he helped me with rides, and got through that. And probably about 6 months later, got bored, started going out drinking again. But in that time, I had started getting some counseling from the church that I was going to at Worcester Naz. They had a psychiatrist on staff at the time who did, appointments with people. And so I met with him for a year and a half. And so even when I relapsed, I was still meeting with him. And like, I was honest with him. He knew what was going on. And and he was like, you got to make a choice. Like, you can't, like, there's a part of you that wants to live in the kingdom, and that there's a part of you that still wants to live in the world. And he's like, you can't do both. It will tear you apart.
yeah, you
And at
can't
this
serve
point,
two masters.
yeah, and at this point, like, I'm going out getting drunk and drinking, and I'm on paper. So, like, if I get caught, like, all the jail time and the extra fines and all the stuff that was suspended in lieu of, you know 3-day DUI school and outpatient treatment and all this other stuff. Like, if I get in trouble, like, that's all gone. I go to jail for 180 days. Like, so there's all this, like, and plus, like, now I'm lying again to my dad, and sneaking around even more, because now I don't have a car, so I have to be even more, like, conniving and stuff. So, but at the end of this, I remember my friend's, his birthday in 2007. I was like, okay, this is it. So I went out, partied, and the next day I'm just done. And so basically, I didn't, like, cut ties with all those people. Like, I still would talk to them, but, like, I stopped hanging out and was just like, I'm done, and turned around and walked away.
And so then how did you stop being dealing with boredom, I guess?
Well, that is a continual struggle.
Because once you're used to that high of those things and
Yeah, so,
yeah.
like, even now, like, so I've been sober for almost 15 years. I met my wife about 3 months sober. We got married like a year and a half later, had kids within 9 months of getting married, you know, had two kids before we were married for 2 years. So, like, there were life situations presented, kept me from getting bored. But now that, we've got 5 kids, but going to work, coming home, doing family, and doing church is just not enough. Like, so
Mhm.
I had to find something more. And so in 2016, I did Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry in Bethel, Cleveland. Did that for 3 years. Prior to that, for 6 years, had been involved in AA, trying to help other guys that were in addiction, using that as kind of like a ministry type thing. there was some fruit there, but a lot of just banging my head against the wall. But learning also how to deal with people like in the midst of their dysfunction and helping them and not just enabling them. You know, I found out real quick that the people that really, really want to get sober, you don't really have to do a whole lot to help them. They are ready to do whatever it takes to get there themselves. The people that need a whole lot of hand holding and prodding, they're not ready. And typically they just haven't suffered enough.
So what would you tell 18-year-old self if you could tell yourself something back then that you might have listened to?
I don't know that I would have. I mean, that was like at that point in my life, like there are some things you like. I am definitely an experiential learner. You know, you can tell me something and I have a really good memory. But there's something about the experience that really sticks. And, you know, my mom tried to tell me, you know, what was in store for me in my future, but I didn't believe her. And I don't know that if I went back and talked to my past self at that age, if I would have believed me even then, because it was still fun. You know, there was a lot of warning signs, but I didn't see that for what it was because I didn't know. You know, and so that's one of the things like with my children now is beyond addiction, like life is hard and you can't run from pain. And typically, like if you can learn to embrace pain and hard stuff, life's actually better. You
So
know,
is that something you try to teach your kids now, is what you're saying?
yeah, like don't run away from hard things or tough things because that a lot of those things, the lessons you learn and the value that it adds to your life by going through hard things actually makes life more worthwhile. You know, and there even now, like there are times like I have to find ways to keep myself from getting bored. But I know enough, like the idea of drinking, there's just no value in it. Like, yeah, I could go get drunk, but for what purpose? Like, there's just like for me now at this point in my life, there's just no purpose in it. And I want my life to have purpose.
Right. Well, and coming from a child of divorce, like the pain that you were in when you were young, that you know now that was there that you didn't recognize then, like how would you recommend that parents deal with their children in that are in that situation? Like often when people are going through divorce, they're in so
Yeah.
much pain, they can't do much for their children.
Yeah.
They're just trying to survive.
Well, and that's the tough thing because like and this is one of the reasons why like I would always joke with people that like I don't believe in divorce. So if it doesn't work out for me and my wife, one of us has to go. And since I'm bigger than her, I like my odds. Because having gone through divorce, like it does so much damage to children that like I get there are issues with infidelity and spousal abuse and stuff like that that you know there are valid reasons for removing yourself from an unsafe situation. But more often than not, I think people make poor long-term decisions when they get married because they don't really think about the long-term view of things. And they think that just getting divorced is going to fix it, but it actually causes more problems than it solves. And especially with the kids, you know, like I was 3 or 4 when my parents got divorced. I had no idea. My dad's moving out. Like, there's no way a 3 or 4 year old can process that kind of information, you know, and it does damage to their psyche and their soul that I think unless you get some counseling and some inner healing, like you can't like love them through it. Like that was the thing is like as a teenager, like I knew why my parents got divorced because I knew they should never probably not have gotten married. Like it was not a good fit, you know. But I had no control over that, and there was nothing I could do to keep them from getting married or to keep them from getting divorced. But I still have to deal with the consequences of that choice. You know what I mean? And I I think had I gotten some counseling or worked through some issues, like it may have helped when I was younger. But sometimes that stuff doesn't really serve us right away, you know,
Yeah, that's true.
or I think my parents thought I was just in pain because they didn't understand. And when I got older, I would understand. And getting older, you understand, but it doesn't fix the pain. The pain is still there eating away at your soul. And
Yeah,
until
because you
really,
still feel abandoned and all this other stuff, all the trauma's still there.
yep. Yeah. So I think like, for parents that are dealing with that, like, I think it may be easier if children are older and can process those big feelings. But with young kids, like their brain is not developed enough to process those big feelings. And so sometimes you have to kind of wait, but it's still a process. Like you same thing with, kids that are brought out of abusive situations. It takes years of work for them to feel safe again, even though they're in a perfectly safe environment now, and it's
that's
just a
very
long
true.
process. But I think you have to be very intentional, about it. Um, but if you've got a kid going through that's in addiction, like I think my mom felt responsible for trying to fix things, because I don't know if she felt responsible for why I was in pain, but what she tried to do to help didn't really help. It just prolonged the experience, honestly.
Mm-hmm. As we're drawing this to a close, we have another minute and 40 seconds or something left. If you would pray for people, if you could pray for all the viewers that are dealing, like the children with trauma and people that are in addiction, whatever the Lord lays on your heart.
Okay.
I would love that.
Yeah, God, I pray that the people that would hear this, that your spirit would move upon their hearts. And then if they're struggling with addiction, I pray, God, that you would reveal to them your love for them, and you would give them a vision for what their life was meant to be, for the purpose for which they were born, which is beyond where they're presently living now. And I pray that you would break the bonds of addiction and begin to set them free, and begin to heal their minds so that they could think clearly and understand what they're doing to themselves, what they're really doing to themselves, and that it's not as good as they think it is. And I pray, God, that if if there's people dealing with trauma from past abuse or past divorce, that kind of stuff, I pray that you would Holy Spirit, that you would comfort their hearts, and you would bring healing, that they could find healing in you, rather than trying to find healing in things that actually just lead them down a rabbit trail where they end up trapped and stuck and in more pain than they were before.
Yeah. Amen. Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for being on today. I really appreciate that.
Yep. No problem.
All right.